Well, Ismail Ahmed of the Board of Trustees of the APC and Ilemona Onoja, a legal practitioner and a member of the PDP, are still with us in the studio. Just before we went on break, you were answering the question on why corruption was still
at common places, and you said it in the beginning that, and the Vice President mentioned it as well, that there's still corruption. There's no doubt about it. We didn't say we have wiped it out completely. But because it's systemic, there's a certain way you have to approach it. And that you have to block the leakages. We're more interested in making sure it doesn't happen again. And there are ways that when it happens, that you block it from happening, than focusing on individual corrupt people and picking them off the road. Like you said, these are things that once you fix something at the top, you hope that it cascades downstairs. And then you make sure that it doesn't happen where it is. In the beginning, yes, when we came in, there was this general belief that, people were a bit more careful. And unfortunately, the nature of human beings is that they revert back to their status quo or the way they are. Not because the president didn't do anything, no, but because this is a democracy which is anchored around the rule of law. You can't just start flogging people and telling them to join the queue or whatever. There has to be a systemic way in dealing with this corruption. I think the president and this administration has been doing that really well. It has not cascaded downstairs to down to the down level in the common places where we want it to be, but it's a work in progress and we're going to get there sooner or later.
Now, Mr. Onoja, what I was asking about earlier was about the CBN report. You shared the monies in this account. It has happened on several occasions. In fact, as chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum, the allegation they haven't quite responded to. Yes, Rotimi Amechi did threaten to go to court as chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum. And so there was a political solution. And I remember there was the implementation of a political solution. Just a moment. I also remember posing that question to the current Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, over why, because she was talking about a lack of savings. And I asked her, why it was, because she was also a commissioner of finance in one of the states, Ogun State, as at that time, why the commissioners were so opposed to this, extra-screwed account. And she said, every time we came to share the money, every time we came to get our share as state, we found out that every time it had been drawn down without our consent and without our knowledge. I mean, how do you respond to that? Well, I would say this, and this is where I would have expectations about how to deal with corruption. Ismail has repeatedly said, systemic issue, systemic issue. Systemic issue requires systemic reforms, right? So the expectation would have been, if we want to deal with this, let us send a bill, an executive bill, or have one of our senators or members of National Assembly sponsor a bill, regularizes the excess crude account that stipulates a procedure for drawdown. How do we also explain the Forex reserve? Because we know that the governors, anytime they threaten to go to court, if the federal government wasn't also afraid, as it currently still is, afraid of, a court action, why they always, try to pacify the governors, in quote, by sharing the money. But I'm also wondering, if we can explain away the excess crude accounts and say, well, it's everybody's money and nobody's money, how do we explain the drawdowns on the foreign exchange reserves? This is a completely different economic argument. Completely different economic argument. And the increase or decrease of the foreign exchange reserves depends on the nature of the economic activity that goes on in the country at that time. The foreign exchange reserves are reserves that sometimes are held in accounts on behalf of the CBN outside of the country. Right? Nobody actually exactly goes into foreign exchange reserves and withdraws that money and spends it. We know what we know how the how the foreign exchange. We've never seen a situation. We've never seen a situation where we got to $27 billion in foreign exchange reserves. I mean, that was a very precarious position. You would agree that the country was in. Again, that is a completely different economic issue. If you... Not related at all to corruption? No, that is purely economics. I'll tell you something. Even now, the people who are questioning economically, even now, how the foreign exchange reserves are rising, the people who are saying that government is selling Eurobonds, for instance. There have been 4 Eurobond sales in the last 3 years. if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 5. But people who are saying government has been selling Eurobonds and has been using the money that it accrues from that as a buffer to increase the size of the foreign exchange.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know about that, Matt. Let me ask you,
But what I'm saying to you is this.
Yes.
The management of the foreign exchange reserves are an economic issue, not related to corruption.
Let me bring this to Ismail, because I know that a lot of people will not agree with that particular analysis towards the end. But let me bring you in. Only recently, we also heard the current emir of Kano talking. I mean, when he was when the price of the naira against the dollar, just kept on shooting through the roof. And right now, one of the criticisms against his administration is that it has not done anything to try and close the gap between the parallel market and even the exchange rate that the